Sarah Mitchell had always been seen as the ideal wife and a dedicated professional. She worked as a correctional officer at Redwood Correctional Facility, a medium-security prison that housed some of the state's most dangerous criminals. She was known for her discipline, her ability to maintain order, and her commitment to the rules. But beneath the surface of her controlled and structured life, something had started to shift. At home, everything seemed perfect. Sarah and her husband Daniel had been married for 8 years. They lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood where everyone knew them as the loving couple who never seemed to have any problems. Daniel worked as a mechanic, running his own small but successful garage. He was a man of routine, up early for work, home by 6, and always making time for Sarah. He adored her, believing they shared a strong and unbreakable bond. But something inside Sarah had changed. The long hours at the prison, the constant pressure, and the monotony of her life had started to wear on her. She began to crave something different, something that made her feel alive. That craving led her down a dangerous path, one that started with stolen glances and small favors, but quickly spiraled into something much darker. It began with Malcolm Reed. He was in his late 30s, serving a lengthy sentence for armed robbery and attempted murder. He had a reputation inside the prison, charming, manipulative, and always looking for an opportunity to exploit weaknesses. Sarah had noticed him watching her, and at first she ignored it. But over time she found herself drawn to the way he spoke to her, the way he made her feel like she was special. It was a dangerous game, but she convinced herself she was in control. Then came Jason Carter. Younger, reckless, and just as dangerous, he had been convicted of multiple violent offenses. He was different from Malcolm, more aggressive, more demanding. And yet, Sarah found herself unable to resist. What started as harmless interactions escalated quickly. She began sneaking in small contraband, extra food, handwritten notes, things that seemed insignificant at first. But soon she was meeting them in restricted areas, engaging in secret encounters that violated every rule she had sworn to uphold. She told herself it was just a phase, something she could stop at any time. But deep down, she knew she had crossed a line she could never go back from. At home, Daniel remained oblivious. He still greeted her every evening with a warm smile, still held her close at night. He trusted her completely, never once suspecting that while he was working hard to build their future, she was risking everything behind prison walls. Sarah believed she was careful. She thought she had covered her tracks, that no one would ever know. She was wrong. Daniel had always been a strong, healthy man. He rarely got sick, never missed a day of work, and took pride in his ability to handle anything life threw at him. But lately, something felt off. It started with fatigue, an exhaustion so deep that no amount of sleep could shake it. Then came the weight loss, the constant headaches, and a lingering sense of weakness that made even the simplest tasks feel overwhelming. At first he brushed it off. Maybe it was just stress, he told himself. Running a business wasn't easy, and with Sarah working long hours at the prison, their time together had started to feel more like a routine than a real relationship. He figured he just needed to rest, to take better care of himself. But the symptoms only got worse. One day, after struggling through another shift at the garage, Daniel finally decided to see a doctor. He expected a simple explanation. Maybe a vitamin deficiency, maybe something mild that could be fixed with medication. But nothing could have prepared him for what he heard. His doctor entered the room with a serious expression, holding a sheet of test results in his hands. Daniel listened in stunned silence as the words hit him like a brick wall. He had tested positive for HIV. Disbelief flooded his mind. There had to be a mistake. He had been faithful to Sarah their entire marriage, never once straying. He had never been involved in anything that could put him at risk. He sat frozen, his mind racing through every possible explanation. But there was only one answer, one source: Sarah. By the time he got home, his hands were shaking. He felt numb, like he was trapped in a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. He waited for Sarah to walk through the door, his stomach twisting with a mixture of anger, confusion, and fear. The moment she stepped inside, he confronted her. The look on her face was enough. The color drained from her skin, her hands trembling as she struggled to find the right words. She didn't even try to deny it. She just stood there, silent, tears welling in her eyes. And that was all the confirmation he needed. The truth unraveled in fragments. She admitted to her affairs, confessing that it had started months ago. 2 inmates, Malcolm and Jason. She didn't know which one had infected her, but it didn't matter. She had brought it home. She had betrayed him in the worst possible way. Daniel couldn't speak. The love he once felt for his wife crumbled in an instant, replaced by something else, something dark, something unrecognizable. He had spent years believing they were a team, believing their marriage was built on trust, but now all he could see was the woman who had destroyed him. He wanted to scream, to break something, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain he was experiencing. But instead, he stayed silent. He needed time to think. He needed to figure out what to do next. Sarah thought she had confessed everything. She thought the worst was over. She had no idea what was coming. Daniel had always been a man of reason. He was not the type to act on impulse, even in the face of betrayal. But this wasn't just any betrayal. Sarah had destroyed his trust, his marriage, and worst of all, his health. He couldn't turn back time, but he could control what happened next. And he was going to make sure that the people responsible paid for what they had done. The first thing he did was gather information. He spent hours online researching Malcolm Reed and Jason Carter, the 2 inmates Sarah had been involved with. He looked up their criminal records, their past offenses, and anything he could find about their lives before prison. He wanted to know what kind of man had not only taken his wife, but also condemned him to a life-altering disease. Malcolm was a career criminal, known for manipulating women and using them for his own gain. He had a history of exploiting people in positions of power, particularly female guards. Jason, on the other hand, was younger, reckless, and prone to violence. Both had nothing to lose, and both had seen Sarah as an opportunity rather than a person. Daniel's anger deepened as he uncovered more details. These men had played his wife like a pawn, using her to smuggle contraband and gain privileges, and she had been too blinded by whatever thrill she was chasing to realize it. He knew he couldn't go to the police with just his anger. He needed something concrete. So he started leaving anonymous tips. Using an encrypted email account, he contacted the prison administration, claiming that a female guard had been involved in inappropriate relationships with 2 high-profile inmates. He provided details only an insider would know, locations, specific schedules, and behaviors that would raise suspicion. It didn't take long for the investigation to begin. The prison was already on high alert due to past corruption scandals, and administrators wasted no time in pulling security footage, reviewing logs, and questioning staff. Other guards who had noticed Sarah's unusual behavior over the months started to come forward, confirming suspicions that something inappropriate had been happening. Sarah, completely unaware that Daniel was behind it, tried to act normal. She went to work as usual, thinking that the worst of her problems were behind her. But when she was suddenly pulled aside for questioning, panic set in. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Security logs showed unauthorized access to restricted areas. Certain inmates had received unapproved items. And then there were the testimonies, whispers among staff, that Sarah had been spending too much time around Malcolm and Jason. Within days, she was placed on administrative leave. Within weeks, she was arrested. The charge? Abuse of power, misconduct, and engaging in inappropriate relationships with inmates. Daniel watched from a distance as the woman who had shattered his life was now watching her own crumble. But his revenge wasn't complete yet. He still had one more move to make. Sarah sat in a cold, grey interrogation room, her hands cuffed to the metal table. The walls around her felt like they were closing in as investigators laid out the evidence piece by piece. Security footage, suspicious activity logs, and witness statements. There was no way out. She tried to deny it at first, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, but the weight of the truth was too heavy to escape. Within weeks, she was officially charged and sentenced. Now, instead of working as a prison guard, she was an inmate. The irony wasn't lost on her. The very system she had once enforced was now controlling her every move. The guards she used to work with treated her with disdain, seeing her as nothing more than another corrupt officer who had crossed the line. But worse than the guards were the other prisoners. Word spread quickly inside Redwood Correctional Facility. Inmates talked, rumors circulated, and soon everyone knew that she had been involved with Malcolm Reed and Jason Carter. But that wasn't all they knew. Someone had spread the word that Malcolm and Jason had been exposed as informants, men who had allegedly cooperated with authorities to gain favors. In prison, being labeled a snitch was the equivalent of a death sentence. Sarah had no idea how this information had leaked, but she didn't have time to wonder. The consequences were unfolding before her eyes. Malcolm was the first to fall. He had always been good at manipulating people, but there were some things even charm couldn't fix. Late one night, he was found in his cell, beaten beyond recognition. He didn't survive. Jason was next. He was attacked in the prison yard, barely making it out alive. Though he survived, he was left permanently disfigured and unable to defend himself against future attacks. The moment he left the infirmary, he was placed in protective custody, isolated from the rest of the inmates for his own safety. Sarah realized the harsh reality. Whoever had exposed them had done it with a purpose. Someone had orchestrated this, ensuring that neither man would escape unpunished. And now she was trapped in the same environment, surrounded by women who saw her as weak, vulnerable, and unworthy of sympathy. Her past reputation as a guard made her an easy target. Every time she walked through the halls, she could feel the stares, hear the whispers. The same inmates she once disciplined now had power over her. She tried to keep to herself, avoiding confrontation. But in prison, isolation was nearly impossible. One day, A group of women cornered her in the showers. They didn't say much, just a few taunts, a few cruel laughs, before one of them shoved her against the wall. It was a warning, a reminder that she was no longer in control. As she lay awake in her cell that night, bruises forming on her arms, she thought about Daniel, the man she had betrayed, the man she had begged for forgiveness. She had assumed he was too broken to fight back. She had underestimated him, and now she was paying the price. Daniel stood outside his garage, watching. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and red. It had been months since Sarah's arrest, and life had taken on an eerie sense of normalcy. Customers came and went, bills were paid, and the world continued as if nothing had changed. But for him, everything was different. His body still bore the weight of the diagnosis, a silent reminder of what had been stolen from him. The virus coursing through his veins was a permanent scar, a punishment for a crime he hadn't committed. But while Sarah was locked away, suffering the consequences of her choices, Daniel had found a way to move forward. Not with anger, not with regret, but with control. From the beginning, he had orchestrated every piece of Sarah's downfall. It was Daniel who had exposed her to the prison administration, planting the seeds of suspicion. It was Daniel who had ensured the right people inside the prison learned about Malcolm and Jason's supposed cooperation with authorities. He had known exactly how the inmates would react, how the rules of prison justice worked. He hadn't lifted a finger, but he had set everything in motion. And now Sarah was living a nightmare of her own making. Through the prison grapevine, he heard bits and pieces of what was happening to her. She had no friends, no allies. The guards treated her with contempt. The inmates saw her as prey. She spent most of her time alone, afraid to trust anyone. Every day was a battle for survival, a life filled with paranoia and regret. She had tried to reach out to him, letters, phone calls, desperate attempts to make amends. He never responded. There was nothing left to say. Daniel knew that revenge didn't erase the past. It didn't cure him or bring back the life he had before, but it gave him something else: closure. He had taken back the power that Sarah had stolen from him. She had made her choices, and he had made his. Now she was rotting in the same system she had once worked for, while he was free. One evening, as he locked up his garage, he received a final letter from her. He didn't even open it. He tossed it into the trash, letting it disappear with the rest of the day's waste. Sarah had chosen her path, and now she was lost in it. As for Daniel, he wasn't a saint, he wasn't a hero, but he had survived. And in the end, that was enough.